You are now tuned into EQ Conversations, a podcast that emphasizes the significance of incorporating emotional intelligence into your day-to-day life and discusses various topics related to emotional intelligence. Now, it's time to turn your EQ up with your host, Dr. Lay.
All right, what's going on, everyone? This is Dr. Lay here, coming with another episode for EQ Conversations. And today, I think I'm going to be a little bit long-winded. I'm going to be a little bit long-winded because I think it's time to kind of have the discussion, the conversation about marriage and why it exists, why we need it, why is it important? I'm looking through a lot of social media. I've been on a social media binge, if you will. I've seen a lot of great content creators. I've gotten a lot of wisdom from social media. You got to be careful who you listen to. And I kept seeing in my For You pages, as well as just the talk about marriage, commitment, relationships, what it means, and why it matters, why so many people want to have healthy, committed relationships, which is great, by the way. But when it gets to the institution of marriage, I gotta be honest, I am a little disturbed by what I've heard and what I continue to hear from both parties, male and female. And so I wanted to just take today's session to really talk about the history as I've come to know it and read about in Western culture as it relates to marriage, why it was important. And then I want to offer an EQ side of the house when it comes to what you can do as an individual to prepare yourself, or if you are married and you're listening to this episode, skills that you can use in your everyday life to improve your marriage. Now, I've been married for 7 years, been with my wife for 9 years. And of course, with any marriage, you have those trials, you have those tribulations, you'll have those complex conversations, you'll have those mood instabilities. Of course, this comes along with the territory of being married. But I really am grappling with what is on the internet about marriage. And I think when it comes to emotional intelligence and the importance of having awareness, the importance of relationship management, I would think that it was pretty cut and dry when it comes to an institution like marriage. And so for those who are listening, if you've never really gotten any feedback or information as to why in the Western society, how marriage has come about, or why do we practice marriage the way that we do in the West? And I'm saying monogamous marriages, right? And that's understood in Western culture, that our marriages are monogamous, okay? Now, it has a long and complex history, but it's influenced by religious doctrine, by social norms, and legal frameworks, right? So, it's a societal construct that has evolved over time, okay? But one thing remains unambiguous is monogamy has served as the cornerstone in Western civilization, offering because you're talking about a process, if you will, or a institution that offers both stability and a framework for social organization that few other structures can claim to have matched. Okay. So when you're when it comes to a monogamous marriage or in the Western culture, I mean, you're starting with the Greco-Roman society, right? The idea of monogamous partnership it really began to gain ground around that time. And so while neither, entirely monogamous, both Greek and Roman civilization, they valued the concept of a stable household. And so usually overseen by meaning one single couple. Okay. So, with the advent of Christianity, monogamy received not only social, but also theological backing, right? So it became a moral and religious imperative and evaluating the institution into something that was a little bit more sacred. And I'm sorry to say, but I'm really not seeing this in today's information that's being pushed. But then you fast forward to the medieval period, the church, codified marriage laws, and monogamy became not just a social expectation, but also a legal requirement. Now, why is that? I really think because the church and later civil authorities recognized that monogamous relationships, it offered a stable and effective environment for child rearing, right? So a monogamous marriage creates a more reliable framework, all right, for like where you're talking about perpetuation of society and the raising of children in a stable home environment. And it really has shown to lead to better educational and emotional outcomes. So it's not just, you know, happenstance that monogamy became the norm. It became the norm because it actually worked. So let's not forget the economic aspects of it, right? So the concept of coverture, where a woman legal rights were subsumed under her husband upon marriage, and may although it may be um, an antiquated or patriarchal system today, it served a purpose in its time, right? So we can't just dismiss that, right? And it simplified the economic unit of a household under the control of one individual, providing a clear structure for property rights and economic stability. Um, Although modern marriages are built on more egalitarian principles, the basic concept remains that two can live more efficiently than one, right? And so we then we move into more like an enlightenment era. Marriage shifted from the economic and social arrangement to one based on love and mutual respect. And I do refer to this as the Disney time frame, if you will. But this shift is not a weakening of the institution, but an evolution. All right. Now, two individuals come together, not just for social and economic benefit, but for emotional and psychological fulfillment. Okay, so this transition has enriched the institution, allowing for partnerships to build on mutual respect and emotional connection, in addition to economic stability and of course, child rearing. As a therapist, when I'm talking to my patients about this, I'm letting them know, both individual and couples, respect, honesty, and trust. That has to be the foundation of this relationship in order for it to have a fighting chance, if you will. Okay, because you're merging two lives with history, two lives with possibly some trauma behind it, two lives that have come through their own ups and downs, their own means of survival, and you're coming together for one common cause. But that common cause has to be the submitting to the actual relationship, to the actual commitment, to the actual marriage. Now, this is going to sound really weird because it's not really about the commitment to one another, believe it or not. Because oftentimes when we do that, and hear me out with this, oftentimes when we look at each other in that commitment frame, we're forgetting that we're coming in with possibly unrealistic expectations. And we're going to get into that too as I identify some of the reasons as a therapist, what I've seen and what I've heard in my own clinical practice and even from other clinicians on why so many marriages are failing. But when you come in, your mindset should be, how can I best serve my marriage? It should not be how can the marriage serve me? True enough, my wife and I were both active duty military. I'm on my way out of the military, retiring out of the military, and my wife has a couple of more years to go. But I can assure you, everywhere we go when we're in uniform, it never phases me. Everywhere I go, I don't care where I'm at, whether it's HEB, shout out to my Texas people, um, Walmart, you name it. If I'm in uniform, I'm going to get at least someone, and I'm talking about all ages people. I'm gonna get someone that says to me, "Thank you for your service." And I know they don't know what I do for the military, but to hear that lets me know that individuals, just by seeing me in uniform, have already assumed that I valued or I decided to take a sacrifice, if you will, to be a part of something greater than myself. You see, that comes along with the institution of the military. They call it selfless service for a reason. That's one of the core values for a reason. So why isn't that initiative given to the institution of marriage? Why is it not a selfless service? Why aren't you thinking, how can I best serve my marriage? So the commitment is actually to the marriage. That's two imperfect people coming together to form a perfect union. The commitment is to the marriage. The selfless service is actually to the marriage. It's what your marriage requires. If both parties are focused on the marriage and knowing that they're coming in asking and knowing, hey, how can I best serve my marriage? The other person is bound to benefit. Okay, so it's just, it baffles me that we're talking about this in today's society when it comes to marriage, when it comes to an institution. It's an institution for a reason. It has its own rules. Like I said, if you look at it from a religious side, it's already laid out. So really, the same way people see me when they see that uniform, I would hope, listening to this, the same way you see people with wedding rings, just walk up to them and say, "Thank you for your service." Okay, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know. But I think that we really have to, we really have to understand that for a marriage, when it comes to that type of commitment, you really have to know, can you serve? Now, the military, institution of the military, less than 1% of the American people would ever serve, that serve today. It's funny when I hear people say, man, I can't serve the military because, man, I don't, my freedom. I ain't about to, I can't listen to nobody. And you won't get shocked to hear that people are saying that in the marriage. Nah, I can't get married. Oh, I ain't listening to nobody. What? Now, it doesn't mean that the institution is without its critics, right? There are those who argue that monogamy is an outdated construct and a social, imposition that restrict individual freedom, right? Now, while it's true that monogamy isn't for everyone and societal norms are continually evolving, dismissing it, it um like wholesale ignores its historical significance and enduring value. And so monogamous marriage has been an adaptive institution. And I get that. I'm not knocking it. right? I'm not knocking that. However, there's no blueprint. There's no blueprint for what people are trying to ask for now. Could you imagine in making a bunch of decisions when it comes to a marriage is based off of the other person? When people come into a marriage talking about some 50-50, my better half, the fact that you're coming in half just already puts you in the curve behind the curveball. Why not come in 100? Where I'm weak, they're strong. Okay. Where you're weak, they're strong. So that other individual helps you with your weaknesses. Because God forbid you're out of pocket. I can tell you now, when I deployed in 2019, we had just had our first child, and there were a lot of things I did that I taught my wife to do, and vice versa. When I came back and she was on 12-hour shifts, she taught me how to tend to our newborn. Well, she wasn't a newborn at that time. She was probably a year. Well, yeah, she was like a year or so. But just getting her ready, getting her to school, things of that nature. My wife had already had a pattern. But if I wouldn't have taught her those things, or she wouldn't have taught me those things, that means when she's out of pocket, then we're about to have problems. Go into your marriage at 100, being the best version of you. Be the best version of you so you know what it feels like, so you know what it looks like. Then you can actually expect that in return because you actually give it to yourself. But if you are a selfish individual, you can't get mad that the other person is selfish. That don't even make sense. I told you in monogamous marriages that a lot of it was governed by religion. Let's talk about that for a minute because we understand that religious individuals have a certain set of beliefs. Those beliefs are actually drawn out by their behavior, right? So when a person believes in Christianity, there are certain behaviors they practice every single day. The more they practice those behaviors, the stronger the belief system gets. Simple. They pray, they may read their Bible, they don't curse, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they treat people with respect, they hang around like-minded individuals, they go to church, they do all of these different behaviors, and the more they practice these behaviors, the stronger their belief system gets. So when an individual says to me as a clinician, like, hey, I believe that I am a trustworthy spouse or whatever it may be. My question for them is going to be, okay, that's great. Now, what behaviors do you demonstrate every day to validate that belief system? If you believe you are in a committed marriage, what behaviors do you validate or do you practice every day to validate that belief system? I have a guilty pleasure. I have to put this out there. So I'm not going to be a hypocrite on this, but I have a guilty pleasure. And that guilty pleasure is watching a podcast. Well, it's a couple of them, but one of them specifically, I just got into it. I haven't watched a lot of it, I'll be honest, but I just got into it not too long ago, roughly around a week or so ago. But I've watched about I'm talking about 3 hours, 2 hours, called Fresh and Fit podcast. So some of you guys who listen and maybe even watch it yourself, you may not even like it. I like podcasting because it forces you to listen to people you don't agree with and you learn to understand their point of view. And I will tell you, a lot of points that are made on that podcast are genuine and it makes sense. But let me tell y'all something, people. I'm just going to be straight up real with you right here. I'm going to stop that background music for a minute because I need y'all to listen to this. If you are considering getting into a marriage with another individual, right? There are certain things you have to understand. I mentioned it earlier: respect, honesty, trust. The respect part is treat people how you would want to be treated. The trust part is trusting your decision making and being honest with your intentions. It sounds simple, but I honestly believe some people find it very hard to do. And what's interesting about this is respect people how you would want to be treated. Treat people, excuse me, how you would want to be treated. Level of respect, right? I can tell you right now, I understand men and women are different. I do understand that when we come together, we are equal in value, but we are totally different in roles. However, respect, honesty, and trust is value. If I'm the steering wheel, my wife is the headlights. Both are very valuable, but two different roles. If I want my wife to be faithful to me, I expect my wife to be faithful to me. I better be faithful to my marriage as well. Excuse me. If I want my wife to be faithful to the marriage, I better be faithful to the marriage as well. And I've heard some things on this specific podcast again, no shade on them or whatever have you, because I really do find a lot of things that they're saying to be it can be discussed. You can have a conversation about it. Okay. But make no mistake about it, people. If you are not built in that way, what they talk about, let me just kind of give context. What they talk about is that if you dating or marry, you expect to marry a high value. This is my first time hearing about the high value thing. But if you're expect if you want to marry, for women, if you want to marry a high value man, this is a man who has a significant amount of resources, money, things of that nature. They are high earners. They have high output. Their ops tempo is through the roof. They have a good networking system. All of these kind of things, which are very good qualities to have as a man. I admire it. I see it in individuals as well. And one of the things that they say is if you want one of these guys, you have to accept the fact that he's going to have more than one woman. If you get with that, yeah, for the ladies, if this is what you want, then I can't knock that. If that's what you want, um, then okay. If that's what high value men do, okay, and you want one of those individuals, okay, then okay, fine. That's all you. But if you are a traditionalist, if you want the marriage monogamy tradition that comes along with the institution of marriage in Western society, if you will, um, then I'm going to say it doesn't make sense why you will put yourself in that type of situation unless there's a very um, sense of entitlement, if you will, okay, or where you think you can change an individual, then then I would say we have to bring it dial it back some, okay, to get that out of your mind right there. Getting into a relationship wanting to change someone is borderline cluster B. I'll be honest. I'll leave it at that. But nonetheless, if you go in with that mentality, then okay, you may not have the right intentions. Okay. So, but I totally disagree with what they're referencing. And again, there are some who may rock it that way when they talk about a marriage and things of that nature. But in all actuality, I can't get down with being in a relationship, a committed relationship, a monogamous relationship only on one side. Um, and I don't understand that. I will never understand that as far as understanding meaning to accept it. I understand it in that people may have that type of contract or agreement with one another, but I do not understand it as though, yes, this is how this is how our marriage is going to be successful. I think it does take a certain type of individual and or individuals, and again, this must be the definition of what evolving in the institution of marriage is, right? But I honestly don't think, being a clinician for nearly 2 decades, more than 2 decades now, and working with a countless amount of people, that we in general, holistically, are built to you know be in a monogamous, if you will, relationship. When you look at the emotional attachment and responsibility that comes along with it. Now, I'm not talking about in nature. I'm not talking about biologically, because yes, biologically, men are literally designed to procreate. We understand that. However, we got to look at the psychology, right? It goes biology, psychology, sociology. All right. So, in the psychology realm, when you talk about values, your morals, your ability to trust, we're talking ages 0 to 6 now when it comes to development. But when we talk about those different characteristics and those different skill sets, if you will, and we look to cultivate that in our lives so that when we get out in the sociological aspect, school, people, building relationships, and all of these, we know how to use these skills effectively. When we talk about building that type, when you got a conscious, I don't know how you can get in a union or an institution such as that and not have a conscience, if you will, or think it's okay to execute your biological nature, what comes natural. Again, I understand the biological, but there's a reason why psychological is next. There's a reason why we learn certain skills when it comes to trust, when it comes to our values, when it comes to integrity, it comes to these different skills. It's a reason why we are encouraged to employ those skills by our parents. This is the natural order that's supposed to happen by our parents so that we can live productive in society. You cannot have those skills, then turn around and say, "I'm gonna be in this commitment, this institution, and I'm gonna live out my animal instincts." Like that, that doesn't make sense to me. That would never make sense to me. That would do more harm than good. Okay, so that's my piece on that. But I do like listening to it. I just think it's funny. I think it's hilarious. But then again, I like listening to podcasts that I don't necessarily agree with, but it teaches me to understand their points of view and where they're coming from. So shout out to First and Fit for that. I mean, I think that was really, I think it's entertainment. I'm going to watch more of their videos. I'm not going to be persuaded in that way, but I am going to listen to how other individuals interact with them, and I would be it'd be interesting to bring up some individuals who can challenge those different viewpoints, but nonetheless, it's still entertaining. Um, but that's my brief history, if you will, on on um on monogamous relationships and marriage and the institution, and why it's like it is for us in the Western world. So when we talk about that history of Western monogamous marriages, we're talking about an institution that has stood the test of time, right? It has evolved and adapted, but its core benefits, that stability, the economic efficiency, and the social harmony, if you will, I mean, it's remained steadfast in my book. So it stands not as a relic of the past, but an enduring testament to human social organization. Now, it's important to approach um this topic when I say, hey, these, inputting or implementing some skills that when I'm working with couples, we dive into, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to kind of hit the high points of these different things, and I've talked about them in other episodes. So some of these skills you already heard. Um, but I want to first um I wrote down some interesting topics, if you will, as to why um, Western marriages are failing today, right? And in my practice and just talking with so many people, um, and I'm talking about individuals who've been divorced, people who are on the verge of marriage, people who are going through a rocky point in their marriage, but they fight it through, and people who are in a healthy marriage. I've talked to them all, people. And so I kind of want to just lay down some of the points. And so I just have the highlights here, and I kind of go in depth and under so that you can understand where I'm coming from with these. But these are some of the reasons why a lot of our marriages are failing. And then I'm going to talk about briefly about what we can do to kind of improve those relationships, right? So top reasons why marriages are failing. And this is just again from my own clinical experience, what I've read, what I've seen, what I've heard from others. So I kind of took it from all angles, but more so it's around the same line, right? Um, and so the first thing I notice is just the changing social and cultural values. Okay. And in the Western societies, the cultural attitude towards marriages have shifted significantly over the past, I would say, few decades now, right? And so, with an increased emphasis on individual fulfillment and personal growth, that idea of a lifelong commitment to a single person may not hold the same weight as it once did. And so, as notions of personal freedom have expanded, right? Because we've seen this a lot as far as liberation and all of these kind of things. The constraints and commitment of marriage may be perceived as limiting, and then it results to a less willingness to work through the difficulties. Okay, so that's individuals who really call it quits very early. Okay, the economic stressors. Okay, this has come up several times in my research of just again asking people questions. And so that when it comes to financial issues, they're just often cited as one of the leading causes of marital stress and divorce. And so that cost of living in many Western countries has risen substantially, right? Because you need a two family household now, income, to kind of take care of yourselves, or at least live a comfortable lifestyle that you choose, right? And so even though the wage growth has often been stagnant, the economic strain can exacerbate existing marital issues or create new ones. And so, as couples struggle to maintain not just their relationship, but also their standard of living, we find that financial burdens tend to add a significant amount of unwanted stress, fear, doubt, things of that nature, and hence why marriages are failing because of financial stressors. Another one I've noticed is the lack of emotional support and communication. And so um, we have, I mean, we've ballooned in the past 2 decades, if you will, where we're connected by technology, but many people find themselves emotionally isolated. Okay. And so for some couples, poor communication skills or a lack of emotional intelligence can hinder meaningful interactions and leading to feelings of isolation, even within the marriage. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've literally had marriages and been around individuals who literally told me that they still feel isolated, alone, and they're married. So emotional neglect can be just as damaging to a relationship as others. And so more overt forms of neglect or abuse. So, even when it comes to, um, um, abuse, like in the family and things of that nature, we find that emotional abuse is even more damaging than physical abuse. Physical abuse, because you can see it, right? But emotional abuse, you cannot. And so emotional neglect, think about that, is just as damaging in relationships. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is my next bullet here is high expectations. Okay. And that rise of social media, along with cultural narratives surrounding soulmates and a happily ever after, the whole happy wife, happy life kind of bull crap. It really have set incredibly high expectations for what a marriage should be. And so when the reality does not meet these expectations, the dissatisfaction can quickly set in. So, unlike past generations who may have had more pragmatic expectations of marriage, the current climate often fosters unrealistic ideas that are hard to meet. Okay. Another one was the reduced stigma around divorce. And so the societal stigma around divorce has lessened significantly in recent years in Western countries, right? So it used to be brought about a lot of shame when it came to even thinking about divorce. And so while this is a positive development in many ways, actually, allowing people to leave unhealthy and abusive relationships more freely, it also means that couples may be less motivated to work through challenges, right? So, with divorce becoming a more socially acceptable option, some people may choose to end the marriage rather than resolve the issues, right? So, those were like the top five reasons, if you will, that we see divorces a lot of the times failing. Now I noticed if you saw those bullets there, um, or you heard, excuse me, those bullets there, I didn't mention anything about adultery, and we know that that happens. But I look at that when it comes to the high expectations, the lack of emotional support, things of that nature. And I may do an episode on that. I may do an episode on the reasons why individuals do cheat. Okay, and I'm gonna break that down. I'm gonna go in depth with that. Right. So, what can you do for those who are listening who are in committed relationships? If you're thinking about getting in a committed relationship, but you may have some fear, you may have some doubt, your track record is not that well in the past because you've chosen poorly or whatever have you. Listen, don't beat yourself up about that, right? These experiences are your experiences. These are lessons, not losses. These things happen for you, not to you, right? I'm a strong believer of that, right? Because if you do meet the person that you desire and you work hard in that relationship and y'all are together for the rest of your lives, then that means everything you experience before that individual was supposed to happen. Otherwise, you wouldn't have never met that individual. So I'm a strong believer that these things happen for you, not to you. But here are some skill sets from an emotional intelligence standpoint that you can take into your relationships, or if you're in those relationships, that you can start employing if you haven't done so already. The first thing, of course, I'm big on this self-awareness, right? Just being aware of your own emotions that as they occur, and understanding how you feel can help you articulate your emotional needs clearly to your partner, which in turn can make problem solving so much easier. Okay. The next is that active listening. Okay. I can't tell you how many times I've seen couples listen to retaliate, if you will, or listen to respond versus just actively being present and understanding what the individual is saying. Right. So when your partner speaks, don't just hear the words, but try to understand the emotions behind them. Eliminate distractions, phone, TV. Please do not try to have no discussion while you got the TV on and things of that nature. Turn away from that. You got to make the eye contact. You got to give feedback to show you're engaged. And this validates your partner's feelings and helps them cultivate a safe space, if you will, for open dialogue. All right. Now, emotional regulation is huge because this is something that I use in the academy. I have an academy for women and I have an academy for men. The Academy for Men is Managing Emotions Naturally, acronym EMEN. Okay. And you'll see it on some of the paraphernalia that I wear as well. I actually have a shop that you can go and purchase these different this different merchandise, if you will. But then I actually have an academy for her. It's called Her Lifestyle. And HER stands for healthy emotional regulation because I believe in giving women the tools, just like I believe in giving the men the tools to regulate the emotions. So in this next bullet I have is emotional regulation, which I talk extensively in the Academy for Women, and you just basically learn to manage your own emotions, right? And I strongly believe, and I explain this, I'm not going to go into depth here, but I strongly believe that men have to be emotionally responsible while women have to be emotionally regulated. I break those down in the academy If you have any questions, you can definitely email me at eqconversations@gmail.com. If you're like, hey, I'm curious, what is actually emotional regulation versus emotional responsibility? At no time, men or women should be emotionally available. I think we do that too much in our society, which makes us then um, um, easy targets, if you will, to have your emotions abused, for the lack of a better statement. But I digress, right? So emotional regulation is really you're learning to manage your own emotions, especially in heated moments. And so before reacting to impulsivity, take a few deep breaths and even step away briefly to collect yourself. Reacting from a calm state often results in a better outcome than acting on emotional impulse. Okay. And I break that down extensively. Right, extensively when I talk about emotional regulation. The next step is also empathy. Right. So putting yourself in your partner's shoes, you would not believe how difficult this is to do for some individuals. All right. Putting yourself in your partner's shoes. And so what you're trying to do at that time is you try to understand their emotions, you try to understand their concerns as well as their viewpoints. And the ability to be empathetic can significantly help in diffusing conflict and strengthening your emotional bond. The emotional bond is all about trust. Okay. Again, we learn trust very early on in our lives. I mean, very early, ages 0 to 6 years old, you're learning trust. Okay. So if you know that you skip that stage there, you already understand you have defense mechanisms that literally make it difficult for you to trust an individual, let alone trust your own decision making. Right. The communication, guys, this is the next one. The communication has to be open. Okay, so because you have to foster an environment where both parties feel comfortable expressing their emotions without judgment. And so discuss not just what is bothering you, but also share positive emotions and accomplishments as well. Okay, this can help both partners feel understood and, most importantly, valued. Right. The next skill is your nonverbal cues. Okay, this really comes into relationship management aspect of emotional intelligence, where you pay attention to body language, those facial expressions, and other nonverbal cues that communicate emotions. And this helps you comprehend unspoken feelings that can prevent misunderstanding. And what I notice in so much communication when it comes to couples is this constant misunderstanding. They're missing the mark. Okay. Paying attention to nonverbal cues will help that. Right. Do not be afraid to ask for feedback. That brings me to my next one here. Right. Don't hesitate to ask your partner how you're doing in terms of emotional support and communication. Right. They can offer valuable insight into aspects you may need to work on. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're talking about the lifelong partner. You're saying even after retirement, even after the kids are gone and everything, this person is going to be in a life, in your life. So you definitely should get comfortable asking for feedback, right? And then you have to be you got to be flexible, but most importantly, you got to be adaptability is huge when it comes to having a healthy relationship, right? So be willing to adapt and compromise, okay? Not sacrifice. Talking about compromise. Okay. And a major part of emotional intelligence is being able to adjust your emotions and actions according to the situation of your partner's needs. Okay. So accountability can greatly help in resolving conflict and finding that middle ground. Right. That also moves into my next one, which is your conflict resolution skills. I can't tell you how many people I have worked with and people I've talked to who their main objective is to avoid conflict. When did conflict become such a negative thing? Conflict is an opportunity of growth. So instead of viewing disagreements as a threat, see them as an opportunity for growth. Use those I statements, and I mean, I go into depth in that academy as well, but I statements to express your feelings and avoid blame. You did this, you did no. Keep it on I, okay? Because it's not all about what happens to you. It's going to be more about why you respond the way that you do. The objective should be finding a solution, not trying to win an argument. There are a lot of people who should have went to law school. I'll be honest with you. When they're in relationships, I mean, they get it in, right? Emotional availability is so critical. But again, I look at it again, I teach emotional responsibility and emotional regulation. Okay. But that emotional responsibility is key. Okay. Because you want to be there for your partner emotionally. That is true. But to share joys, your fears, your disappointments with them and invite them to do the same. This is very important, okay? Because if you have these skill sets for yourself, it is not against the rules or so far fetched to have these expectations in your partner. If you know how to employ these skills on your own for yourself in your own life, there's nothing wrong with you having these expectations in a relationship. And so emotional responsibility, it strengthens that trust and it fosters a deeper emotional connection. And so improving your emotional intelligence is really an ongoing process and it benefits not just the intimate relationships, but also your social interaction. And so by continually working on these skills, you are likely to find that your intimate relationships becomes more fulfillment or more fulfilling, if you will. And then at the same time, you're building resiliency, right? So, guys, I know I'm usually at a 30-minute, but I think I'm over big time. But nonetheless, I had a lot to say on this, and I even have more to say. I'll be honest with you. But I'm exiting the last couple of pages of bullets that I have here because I got scribble all over the place. My mind kind of just roams according to my bullet points and things of that nature. So I do apologize if things were out of whack and what I was saying, if it was unorganized. I will get better at this. This is my first year hitting podcasts and everything, but I am passionate about some things. And as a mental health therapist, as an emotional intelligence coach, I am passionate about human relationships because I sucked at them at one point. And I continuously work on my craft so that I'll be a better communicator, a better listener, but most importantly, I have more meaningful relationships, starting with my marriage, my relationship with my daughter, my relationship with my daughter who's on her way, but then also just individuals in life in general. Okay. From people I work with to people, my friends and things of that nature. And I think we all should focus on that more versus all these other distractions that we're hit with every day, right? Focus on the things that you are ultimately responsible for responding to, how you respond to things. And a lot of it, sad to say, have to do with the way we see ourselves in relationships. And so I'm not surprised why our marriages may be failing the way they are in the Western world. Maybe there's some capitalism stuff. I mean, not to get all into but I understand that some things are working against relationships. There are some things that don't want to see relationships flourish in our society. And it's sad, but I think with emotional intelligence, we can at least have that awareness and make sure we're downloading the right information so that we can make informed decisions about our lives when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to building healthy boundaries, not barriers, but boundaries with people. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I so appreciate it. The next episode, again, I'm going to be on this relationship train for a minute. Well, not a minute. We know what that means when we say a minute, but I'm gonna hit a couple of episodes when it comes to relationships because I think this is just a hot topic. It's a hot topic and it's happening all the time, and everybody, most people, not everybody, but most people in society, they want meaningful relationships. So let's work towards that. Let's put the good out and really be the best version of ourselves for others. Okay. Thanks again, guys. This is EQ Conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Lay. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for listening to EQ Conversations with your host, Dr. Lay. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, emotional accountability is your responsibility.